Today you will hear the testimony of Elias Al-Rahim, born into one of the most powerful Muslim families in the Middle East, heir to a lineage that claimed to carry the very blood of the Prophet Muhammad. Since childhood, he was molded to lead, to obey, and to never question. But within him there was an emptiness that no prayer could fill. Until one ordinary night, something unexpected happened. While browsing the internet, Elias clicked on a video by Charlie Kirk, and those words pierced his soul like an arrow. From that moment on, his life became a battle between faith and survival, persecution, imprisonment, miracles, and a supernatural encounter that would change everything forever. And to begin, make sure you are already subscribed to this channel, leave your support with a like, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Together, we can share stories that transform lives.
My name is Elias Al-Rahim. I grew up surrounded by luxury and silence, a heavy, almost sacred silence that lived within the walls of my house in Baghdad. From the outside, people saw the glow, the power, the Persian rugs that covered the floor, and the verses of the Qur'an painted in gold on the walls. But no one saw what was behind those doors, the weight that came with the honor. I was the son of Sheikh Abdul Rahim, the most respected man in our community. People bowed before him, kissed his hands, sought his advice, and called him the voice of God among men. And I was the son who would inherit everything. Since I was a child, I was told that my destiny was to serve the faith with obedience and purity, without flaws, without weakness, without doubt. My father believed that the Rahim blood carried a divine mission. I believed it too, to a certain extent. He trained me to lead, and I accepted that burden with the weight of a man who never had the chance to choose another path. At 6 years old, I was already waking up before the sun rose, kneeling on the rug, and reciting the sacred words he had taught me. I repeated them by heart, not fully understanding what they meant but performing them perfectly, because perfection was the only option I had. The day began with the chants of prayer echoing from the minarets, and the sound of voices guided me like a spiritual clock. I would get up, put on my spotless white clothes, and cross the courtyard of the house to the main hall. There, my father would already be waiting for me with his stern gaze, long beard, and the Qur'an open before him. The smell of incense filled the air, and the silence weighed more than words. He made me repeat entire passages from the book, correcting me on tone, pauses, and inflection. One mistake was enough for me to start everything over again from the beginning. By the time I was 10 years old, I had memorized almost half of the Qur'an. At 15, I recited in public before hundreds of believers, and people looked at me as if I were a living promise of the future. I saw the pride in my father's face, the admiration in the eyes of the men around me, and I tried to believe that it was enough. But inside me, something began to stir, a kind of spiritual unease that I could not name. The nights were long. The sound of prayers coming from distant mosques echoed like a constant reminder of who I was supposed to be. I closed my eyes and tried to find meaning in those words I had recited so many times. But the emptiness remained. I did everything right, yet I felt no peace. It was a question that haunted me, silent, persistent. Why, if I serve God with such devotion, do I still feel so far from Him? I would never dare to ask that question aloud. My father would see it as heresy, as weakness, as dishonor. So I kept it inside me, suffocating every thought that threatened to escape. Over time, what began as discomfort turned into a burden. I followed every ritual, but I felt that something essential was missing. Faith, which was supposed to be a source of life, began to feel like a golden prison. The more I studied, the more I realized that knowledge did not heal my soul. I was admired, respected, but inside me, there was only an echo. There were moments when I looked at the starry sky of Baghdad and wondered if God truly heard me. I called Him merciful, but I rarely felt mercy. I called Him loving, but I did not feel love. Everything in me was duty, obedience, and appearance, and somehow that perfection was destroying me from within. I saw my father counsel desperate men and women, speaking about the will of God with absolute conviction. But I also knew that sometimes he cried alone, hidden in his study. That made me think that perhaps even he did not have all the answers. The faith that held us together also seemed to be the wall separating us from the truth. It was in that context that, in the year 2019, my life began to unravel. I was sent as a translator on a humanitarian mission in northern Iraq. It was a refugee camp devastated by war, where the air smelled of dust, sweat, and despair. There, among torn tents and starving children, I met a man who would change everything, Michael Reed. Michael was American, different from anyone I had ever met. He spoke calmly, with a peace that disarmed me. He never tried to convince me of anything, he simply helped. He worked from sunrise to sunset, treating the wounded, distributing food, caring for people without expecting anything in return. I watched him with curiosity, trying to understand where that serenity came from. He was a Christian, and that, to me, was reason enough to keep my distance. I had learned from an early age that Christians were infidels, impure people who had distorted the scriptures. I respected him, but deep down I believed he was condemned. But destiny has strange ways of opening one's eyes. On a hot afternoon, the sound of explosions shook the camp. Chaos took over the place, screams, smoke, panic. I remember the fear, the confusion, the dust burning my eyes. While everyone was trying to escape, Michael did something that marked me forever. He knelt in the middle of the smoke, placed his hands over a wounded man, and began to pray. It was not a rushed prayer. It was not a cry of despair. It was a calm, sincere conversation, as if he were truly speaking to someone who was listening. And the most striking thing, he was not praying only for his friends. He was praying for his enemies as well. I was paralyzed. That made no sense in my mind. A man praying for those who attacked him? That went against everything I had been taught about justice and honor. But on Michael's face, there was something I could not ignore: peace. After the chaos passed, I approached him and asked, still breathless, "Why did you do that? Why did you pray for them?" He looked me in the eyes and answered simply, "Because Jesus taught me to love even those who hate me." Those words kept echoing in my head for the rest of the day. To love those who hate you? That was impossible. It was irrational. But at the same time, there was something deeply true in that answer. Later, I saw him helping a man who, only hours earlier, had been on the other side of the war. He carried him on his shoulders to the medical post, sweating, stumbling, and yet with a look of compassion. That night, lying on an improvised bed inside the tent, I could not sleep. The image of him kneeling, praying amid the smoke haunted me. I felt that I had witnessed something divine, something that went beyond every barrier of religion. I took my phone and began to search in silence, afraid of being discovered. I typed, "Why do Christians pray for their enemies?" The first result led me to a video. The title said, "The Truth the Media Does Not Want You to Know About Jesus." The name of the presenter was Charlie Kirk. I had heard of him vaguely before, but I never imagined that I would hear something that would move me so deeply. I clicked, and what I heard that night changed everything. Charlie spoke with a different kind of conviction. He did not use complicated words, he did not shout, he did not try to prove anything by force. He simply spoke about Jesus, not as a distant prophet, but as someone alive, real, close. He said that Jesus did not come to create religion, but to restore the relationship between God and the human being. As I listened, something began to happen inside me. It was as if those words passed through a wall I did not even know existed. My heart burned. I could not explain it, but I felt a gentle force, as if the truth itself were calling me by name. I heard Charlie say, "You can know all the rules, follow all the commandments, and still not know the truth. Because the truth is not a book, it is a person. And the name of that person is Jesus." Those words hit me like lightning. I thought, how can someone speak of God with such certainty, with such love? I stayed awake the whole night watching video after video, trying to understand who this Jesus was that he spoke of. Each phrase seemed to fit into an empty space inside me. For the first time, I felt close to God, not because of prayers, not because of traditions, but because of an invisible presence that I could not deny. It was as if something were beginning to awaken, and at the same time, a voice inside me said, "Be careful, Elias, you are going too far." But it was too late. My heart had already heard the call. I did not know that this seemingly innocent curiosity, a simple click on a video, would be the beginning of the greatest spiritual war of my life. I only knew that something inside me had been ignited, and that nothing would ever be the same. From that moment on, I could not stop. I wanted to understand who this Jesus was who spoke of love in the midst of war, who turned fear into peace, who taught forgiveness when everything in me screamed for revenge. But what I did not yet know is that this search would cost me everything. For weeks I lived between two worlds. On one side, the life that everyone expected from me, the son of the sheikh, the heir of the faith, the example who should inspire hundreds of other young men. On the other, a new fire growing inside my chest, something I could neither explain nor extinguish. Every night when the house sank into silence and the last call to prayer echoed in the distance, I locked myself in my room, turned off the lights, put on headphones and quietly opened YouTube. There, in the cold glow of the screen, I watched Charlie Kirk's videos. His words seemed to cross time and space, as if they were directed at me. He spoke about Jesus with a conviction that completely disarmed me. I had heard the name Isa 1,000 times before, in the Qur'an, in my father's conversations, in sermons that claimed to be about the same prophet. But now that name sounded different. Charlie said that Jesus did not come only to teach but to save, that he was the very way, that it was not enough to know the truth. One had to know the person who was the truth itself. I listened and felt a mixture of fear and fascination. Fear, because in my world that was forbidden. Fascination, because something inside me told me that this voice was revealing what I had always wanted to understand about God. I began to live in secret. While everyone slept, I stayed up late with the phone hidden under the blanket, devouring every word, every verse, every explanation. Sometimes I cried without knowing why. Other times I felt a peace so strong that it seemed the very air around me changed. But one dawn, something happened. I remember it as if it were today. The fan made a soft sound and the light from my phone illuminated the ceiling of my room. I had left a video of Charlie playing automatically, and he was reading the Gospel of John. His voice spoke about Jesus saying, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." Those words seemed to echo in my mind until sleep overcame me. And then, in the middle of the night, I had a dream so real that even today when I close my eyes I can still feel it. I was in a place I did not recognize. In front of me there was a narrow river, but unlike any river I had ever seen. It was not made of water. It was made of light. A living golden light moving as if it were breathing. The air was light and a pure silence covered everything. On the other side of that river of light there was a man in white garments, standing, looking directly at me. I could not see all the details of his face, but I felt the tenderness in his gaze. It was a look that crossed time, that knew me completely, that knew every thought, every wound, every prayer I had never had the courage to make. I tried to cross the river. I took a step forward, but something stopped me. It was as if my feet had been suspended in the air. I struggled to move, but I could not. The man then raised his hand calmly and spoke a phrase that cut the silence like a gentle thunder. "If you want to come to me, first eat the bread of life." The sound of those words seemed to spread through the air and enter inside me. It was as if the universe itself had stopped to listen. Suddenly, everything around me began to dissolve into light, and I felt a force wrapping around me. Warm, powerful, but at the same time, full of peace. I woke up suddenly, my heart racing. The room was completely dark, and the distant sound of the call to prayer came from some nearby mosque. I was sweating, my hands trembling, and that phrase still echoed in my mind. First eat the bread of life. I sat on the bed, breathless, trying to understand what it meant. Was it just a dream? Or something more? I grabbed the phone, which was still on the edge of the bed, and noticed that Charlie's video had ended, but the screen showed a thumbnail with the words, Gospel of John, Chapter 6. Without thinking much, I opened the digital Bible I had downloaded days earlier, something I had never told anyone, and the first verse that appeared was John chapter 6, verse 35. "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." At that moment, time stopped. I did not cry, I collapsed. It was as if the same man from the dream was there speaking directly to me. I fell to my knees, and tears began to flow uncontrollably. I did not know what was happening. I only knew that his presence was there. It was as if the entire room had been filled with something invisible, yet real. For a moment I felt as if someone had placed a hand on my shoulder. There was no one there, but I felt it. And inside my heart, a certainty grew like fire. It was Jesus. He called me by name. It was not coincidence. It could not be. No human being would have the power to create such a direct connection between a dream and a verse I had never read before. The dawn alone, on my knees on the cold floor, I whispered softly, "If you are real, Lord, I want you. I will seek you, even if it costs me everything." And I knew it would cost me. After that night, everything changed. I was no longer the same man. I began to pray in secret, no longer the repeated prayers I had learned, but sincere conversations with a God I now truly felt. I would wake up before dawn, open the window of my room, and let the wind touch my face while I spoke with him. Sometimes I said nothing. I just stayed in silence, feeling peace. For the first time in my life, I knew what peace was. But along with this new life came fear. I knew what happened to those who chose to follow this path in my land. Even so, something stronger than fear guided me, a certainty that it was worth it. Days went by and I realized I was being transformed. Things that once made me angry now seemed small. Words that once wounded me no longer had power over me. But the deepest transformation was in my heart. I wanted to love people, even those who despised me, until one day, everything began to crumble. My oldest son, curious, saw me make the sign of the cross. He was only 4 years old, but he observed everything, and one afternoon in front of my father he imitated me, crossed his hands over his chest and said something like, "Jesus." At that moment the world stopped. The look on my father's face, which had always been stern, turned into fury. He called me into his office, locked the door, and asked in a low, sharp voice, "What does this mean, Elias?" I tried to deny it, but he already knew. He went to my room and began to search everything, the drawers, the books, the rugs, until, between the pages of one of my Qur'an books, he found what I feared most. The digital Bible printed on folded sheets. The sound of the paper tearing was like thunder. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then shouted my name like never before. Hours later, armed men came to our house. I was taken away without time to say goodbye to my wife or my children. The accusation was simple and fatal: apostasy. That night, a fatwa was issued. The verdict: Elias Al-Rahim is an apostate. He must die. I was taken to a place no one knew, an underground prison used to treat cases like mine. The air smelled of rust and dried blood. The walls were damp, and the sound of chains clanging mixed with distant groans. For more than 1 year, I lived between life and death. The interrogations were always the same. Who corrupted you? Who made you believe these lies? Who is the Christian that taught you these things? They wanted names. They wanted confessions. But I had nothing to say because what had happened to me had not come from any man. It came from God. I was beaten, left without water, humiliated. But I never denied the name of Jesus. Sometimes, in the middle of the darkness, I repeated the words I had heard in Charlie's videos. The truth sets you free, even if the world hates you for it. Those words became my food. I repeated them silently, as if they were the very bread of life that Jesus had mentioned in the dream. And every time I said them, I felt strength returning inside me. Even on the worst nights, when my body ached and my mind seemed ready to give up, an invisible presence reminded me, "You are not alone." I knew he was there. I did not see him, but I felt him, in the air, in the beating of my heart, in the hope that refused to die. And so, day after day, month after month, even among bars and screams, I learned the purest meaning of faith. To believe even when everything seems lost. And it was that faith, that living presence within me, that sustained me until the impossible happened. When they finally released me, I was no longer the same man who had been taken from home months earlier. I left that prison with a scarred body and an exhausted soul, but with a steady heart. I knew I could not go back, that I could never deny the name that had transformed my life. Even free, the shadow of danger still followed me. I could feel it in people's eyes, in the footsteps behind me on the streets. The sentence over my head was still alive. And it was. The fatwa that declared my death was still valid, and anyone could be the executor. My own family saw me as a stain on the honor of the Rahim name. The son of the great sheikh had betrayed the name, the tradition, and the blood. I was no longer the heir, I was the enemy. Every corner of my city carried memories and risks, and even the air felt heavier. In every public prayer I heard indirect references to the punishment reserved for those who stray from the path. And even so, I walked through the streets as if I were invisible. As someone who had already died to the world and now existed only to fulfill the purpose God had given him. I knew I could not stay. That same week, I left everything behind. My house, my books, the few clothes I still had. I left in silence, crossing the border with false documents and a small suitcase. Everything I owned fit in my hands. But for the first time, my heart was light. I had lost everything, but inside me burned something that neither fear nor pain could extinguish, the presence of Christ. I arrived in Jordan as a man without a name. I spent days sleeping in shelters, then found refuge in a small village in the mountains where no one knew me. I worked in markets, cleaned streets, carried boxes, and each night was a new test of survival. Sometimes I spent entire days without speaking to anyone, and the silence seemed to swallow me. But even in that desert of anonymity, something inside me bloomed. In the cold dawns, I knelt on the dirt floor and spoke to God as one speaks to a friend. I did not ask for anything. I only gave thanks. Faith had become my only treasure. Years passed, and time began to heal the outer wounds, but inside me there was still a promise unfulfilled: baptism. Since that dream, the voice of Jesus saying, "Eat the bread of life," echoed within me like an unfinished calling. I had already believed. I had already given my life to him, but I had yet to enter the waters, to seal publicly the new covenant. But in the country where I lived, that was almost impossible. No church dared to baptize a former Muslim. I was a wanted man, and any wrong step could mean death. Even so, I did not give up. I waited 13 years. 13 years since that dream that changed everything. 13 years of silence, whispered prayers, and hidden tears. And then, one morning in July, I received a short message from a missionary I had met in Amman. "Tomorrow at sunrise, at the river, bring only what is essential." I did not sleep that night. The sky was clear, and the wind seemed to announce something new. Before dawn, I walked to the agreed place, a small river hidden among hills and olive trees. The waters were calm, almost still, reflecting the golden light of the rising sun. The missionary looked into my eyes and asked if I was sure. I answered with tears. They were not tears of fear, but of freedom. I entered the water slowly, and when he spoke the words, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," I felt as if all the weights of the past dissolved in that river. The cold of the water seemed to cut, yet at the same time it healed. When I emerged, I felt the air as if it were the first breath of my life. It was the rebirth of a free man. But I still did not know that this new beginning would bring one of the most intense trials of my journey. A few months after the baptism, the news reached my family. I do not know how, but the information leaked. In the East, nothing stays hidden for long. I was found. It was late afternoon when everything happened. The sun was setting slowly, painting the desert with orange tones. I was walking along an isolated road on the outskirts of Amman, returning from a small market where I worked helping merchants. On the way, a black car approached silently. I immediately recognized the voices. My heart froze. The car stopped abruptly, and 5 men got out. My uncle Yusuf was in front. Behind him, my 4 brothers. They surrounded me. The wind blew hard, raising dust, and the sound of cicadas seemed to be the only living noise in that immensity of sand. Yusuf spoke with the same calm he used when leading prayers at the mosque. "Our Father ordered us to bring you back, dead or alive." For a moment, time stopped. I looked into their eyes and saw no anger. I saw pain, confusion, hatred mixed with love. I knew that deep down they were only obeying what they believed was right. So I took a deep breath and answered with serenity. I no longer belong to the darkness. Do whatever you want. My uncle looked at me for a few seconds. No emotion, no hesitation. Then he pulled a pistol from his coat and pointed it at my chest. The whole world seemed to shrink into that moment. The sound of the shot echoed through the desert, dry and final. I felt the impact, the searing heat piercing my body, and I fell. The cold ground received me like an embrace. As the blood flowed, a strange peace enveloped me. I felt no fear, only a certainty. If I die now, I will die with him. But the unexpected happened. Suddenly I heard a female voice, sweet and urgent, saying, "Run, run, escape now." I opened my eyes and there was no one. But something inside me made me get up. Still bleeding, without strength, I began to run. Behind me, the sound of bullets tore the air. The shots passed so close I could feel the wind cutting my skin. Desperation and faith mixed together. Each step felt like the last, and yet I kept running. After a few meters, my legs gave out. Pain took over, and darkness swallowed me. When I woke up, I was lying on a white bed. The sound of machines and voices in Arabic in the background. The smell of alcohol and medicine. I was alive. A nurse watched me with astonishment. Beside me, a doctor spoke with another man. He was hit by a bullet, but this makes no sense. My body trembled. I tried to get up, but the pain stopped me. The doctor approached, and I asked what had happened. He looked at me with a confused expression and replied, "The bullet entered your leg, traveled an impossible path, and disappeared. No bone was hit. No tendon was torn." Another surgeon, a Christian, entered the room and looked closely at the X-ray. He shook his head and murmured, "There is no human explanation. This is a miracle." That phrase kept echoing in my mind. Miracle. I cried like a child. Not from fear, but from gratitude. I had been wounded, yes, but preserved. Death had passed close by, but the hand of God had deflected it. I understood that the voice I had heard in the desert saying, "Run," was not from an ordinary woman. It was him, the same one who had spoken to me in the dream, the same one who had lifted me up in prison, the same one who now kept me alive. The following days were full of recovery and silence. I could not go back home or stay in the hospital for long because I risked being discovered. I was secretly taken in by a small local Christian congregation. Simple people, but full of faith. They brought me food, prayed for me, and helped me escape. As my body healed, I reflected on what had happened. That bullet that entered my body and zigzagged inside without destroying anything, it was a symbol. It was as if God were saying to me, "I allowed you to be struck, but not destroyed. I left you wounded, but alive, because there is still purpose in your pain." And I believed that with all my heart. After I could walk again, I had to change hiding places several times. Each new night was an escape. Each dawn, proof that I still breathed because of grace. Sometimes, when fear tried to return, I remembered what Charlie Kirk said in his videos, "When God calls you to a purpose, no human force can stop it." And that was exactly what I felt. God had called me, and neither death, nor the desert, nor the weapons of my own family could stop me. The wound healed, but the mark remained. A silent reminder that my life now belonged completely to him. That day in the hospital was not only a physical miracle, it was the second birth of Elias. I was no longer the man searching for answers. I was the man who had found the truth, and that truth would sustain me wherever I went. But what I still did not know was that this miracle would not be the last. There was still more to happen, and the purpose of all this was only beginning to be revealed. I was taken in by a small group of missionaries living on the border, simple people, but with a faith so alive it seemed to light up everything around them. They hid me, cared for my wounds, and over the weeks began to fight for me to get political asylum. It was a long process, full of risks, but finally, with the support of the French embassy, I managed to leave the Middle East. I remember the moment the plane took off. As the city disappeared under the clouds, I felt a mix of pain and relief. I was leaving behind the place where I was born, but I carried with me something far more valuable than any inheritance or family name. I carried the faith that had saved me. I arrived in France as a remade man, but invisible. I lived discreetly, always watchful, because the sentence over my head still existed. Even so, it was there, in the midst of anonymity, that God began to rebuild everything fear had destroyed. My wife and my children managed to join me soon after, and seeing my children running free through the streets of Paris was like breathing again. I was far from home, but I was finally at peace. Years later, I received a call that would change everything. On the other end of the line, a trembling, familiar voice. It was one of my brothers, the same one who had shot me that day in the desert. He was crying. He said that after years of torment and repeated dreams with my face, he met Jesus. He said he now understood everything. In that moment, I realized the miracle had not ended. Since then, I have begun to share my story with anyone who wants to hear. I speak in small Arab communities, universities, and discreet gatherings. I always say that Jesus is the true protector, the only bulletproof vest for the human heart. And even living in the shadows, I know that my voice has reached those who, like I once did, search for the peace that only Christ can give.
The journey of Elias Al-Rahim is living proof that no heart is ever too far to be reached by God. He lost everything the world could offer, status, wealth, security, but found something infinitely greater, the peace and love of Jesus Christ. And now, that same opportunity stands before you. If while hearing this testimony something touched your heart, if you felt that silent call beating inside you, do not ignore it. Say now, aloud or in silence with sincerity, I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. And to make your decision of faith public, write in the comments exactly this. I accept Jesus. You are not alone. This is a family of faith, and all of us here are praying for you. And if this story strengthened your faith, do not leave without liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue spreading messages that have changed lives around the world. And if you made it this far, also write in the comments, I love Jesus. Because that is what unites us. The love that never fails, never gives up, and turns even the deepest wounds into testimonies of hope. And get ready. Here is an invitation to the next video that is already appearing on the screen. The story of a princess in Saudi Arabia who found Jesus through Charlie Kirk and lost everything. A real, powerful, and transformative story. Click and come with me to discover another proof that when the love of Christ enters, even the most impenetrable palaces become altars of grace.